Marc, a very hearty welcome from us.
Thank you. Yeah.
So this is a very, very important program, and we're so thrilled to have you part of this program. And because you are global head of HR, you're in 2 or even 3 or even 4 countries at once sometimes. So this is our way of making sure we have you in the room and part of the learning process in organizational coaching. I really like the way that you make a distinction in your book. The book is a fabulous book which is prescribed on the program. Your article that you wrote is also part of the prescribed reading, but just to help them with a helicopter idea. And you do that very well when you say you make 3 distinctions around business coaching versus everything else.
What is meant by coaching on the axis, and why? Why it's I would like to think, an important piece in the theoretical understanding of coaching as an offering, and in particular business coaching. And I would say there's one key point that it makes, and it breaks it down into 3 subpoints. But the one key point it makes is that business coaching is unique and distinct from life coaching and counseling. And it is not a tweak of life coaching applied to business. That is a mistake, and quite a big mistake in industry. And what the book tries to explain is why that differentiation is required and the consequences of not making it for value creation in business. So let me perhaps begin by saying that up until recently, when coaching has come on the scene, the way that people learn about coaching is they study it as a generic dialogue-based technique. So coaching is this way of talking with someone to get to a goal that they put in place and they get some value out of doing it. And there's this technique of doing this talking and asking questions and incisive questions and reflecting back and exposing options and so forth. And that is what coaching is. And that's true only to a point. To suggest that coaching is this dialogue technique is a very simplistic way of thinking about it, even though to an extent it's true. The problem is that when you apply this dialogue technique in a life coaching context compared to a business coaching context, it's chalk and cheese. Yes. It's not a tweak, it's chalk and cheese. Yes. And the way that I like to provide the analogy for that is it's like saying the coaching dialogue set, or that ability, is like a doctor's ability to, say, cut with a scalpel, a surgeon's ability to cut with a scalpel. It's absolutely critical that a surgeon is able to cut well with the scalpel. That's the dialogue technique. Okay. However, if the surgeon does not understand if he or she is working on a human body or on a prickly pear, okay, it doesn't really matter how good they are with the scalpel. Can you imagine what part of surgery is understanding the body that you're working on, and what part of it is the skill of the technique of using the scalpel? And unfortunately, it's not enough to just train people in that sort of scalpel technique and say, right, well, you just applied in a business context, or you just applied in a counseling context, or a life coaching context, or whatever, a mentoring context in a community setting, and it's all pretty much the same. You just do this dialogue thing and good things happen. That is as problematic as saying, well, Mr. or Miss Surgeon, you work with your scalpel and you cut. Well, if you're working on a human being or on a prickly pear, well, just cut away, as long as you're good at cutting. And the key understanding is that understanding the context of business is the first step to understanding how to do business coaching, and the inclusion of dialogue technique as the sort of scalpel work in that is a parallel learning process, or even a secondary learning process. Both are absolutely necessary. You have to be good at the dialogue technique, but you have to be exceptionally good at understanding the business context. And unfortunately, what's been happening up until recently in the coaching world is that people have been trained in coaching for the purpose of a kind of life coaching counseling context.
Kind of generic.
A generic context, but heavily weighted towards individual well-being insight, awareness, and so forth, personal growth, influenced by the origins of coaching, which are, largely come from the human sciences, in particular psychology. And there's a massive disconnect with the commercial reality of business and an understanding of that commercial reality and applying coaching in that commercial reality. So coaching on the axis is about business coaching and not about life coaching and counseling, and essentially, I suppose, clarifies the differentiation and also talks about how to do business coaching as differentiated from life coaching.
The expression that you've used in the past that I've heard you use is people have been doing life coaching inside a business.
Well, that's the mistake.
Yeah.
The mistake that has been happening in the market. And I've seen this because I was a provider of coaching, and then I crossed the boundary line, and now I'm a procurer of coaching for the last 8 years, as well as a provider. So I know what it's like on both sides of that transaction. The mistake is that people sell business coaching into businesses, but what they really offer is life coaching / counseling. They don't know they're doing that.
They don't know
and it doesn't get the outcomes that they hope for. Or it does, but it's luck. It's just sheer luck. And that's where I come to the sort of 3 key reasons why there's the differentiation. The first difference between life coaching / counseling, and really in many respects I view life coaching as a style of counseling, if you like. It's goal-orientated, future-focused, healthy counseling.
It's like brief solution-focused therapy.
Correct. Like brief solution-focused therapy, but with a sort of action orientation, outcome-based focus. And that's fantastic, and I've got no problem with life coaching. It's great. Knock yourselves out. The more the merrier. But it's not business coaching. And there are 3 reasons why it's not. And the first one is that life coaching / counseling is individually orientated. In other words, it is focused on an individual and not focused on a system, group, team, or organizational context. And I give the analogy here on this first point of, say, individual counseling as differentiated from marital counseling.
Yeah, it's a great differentiator.
Right. So, for example, if you went to, and your marriage was wobbling and you wanted to see a counselor, you and your husband, who's the client? Is it you or is it your husband?
I know the answer. So.
Yeah. But I think everyone knows the answer, because everyone who's been in that situation knows that you both have to be the client. And anyone goes, well, hang on a second, if I think that this counsellor is biasing towards my husband, what's going to happen to the counselling? It'll fail immediately. Or vice versa. If my husband thinks that the counsellor is biased towards me, it's gone. So we know that the orientation for the marital work has got to be the relationship is the client, and there's an equitable treatment of focus on both. In life coaching counselling, the orientation is to the individual. In business coaching, you have a multiple client reality. You are coaching an individual inside of a business context. There are other people in that context, firstly, who are also stakeholders in this process. And the organization itself is a stakeholder. And the organization is paying the coach to come on board and help create value for the organization just as much as help the individual. And so the coach has to have a multiple client orientation and not bias in favor of the individual. So this is the first mistake that happens, is that life coaches / counselors come in and they just unconscious, it's quite unconscious, it's a cultural bias based on how they've learned to do this work, favor the individual in, over and above the organization, and don't work with the relationship as the client, or what I like to say is the system as the client. And they can't in any way let the organization feel that they're a subordinate client, or for that matter, and this is as important, they can't let the individual feel that the organization's needs or interests are placed above the individual's, because that'll also fail. The individual will go, I don't want you as my coach if I could feel that you're in favor of the company. Yes. The individual must feel just as important as the organization, and vice versa. And that's the first difference. And that's not a small difference. That's a profound difference, and the book really unpacks.
Yeah.
It's a basic orientation from an individualistic orientation to a systemic orientation.
Can I just come in here and ask you something here? Because I think it is so significant that people have to fight against it, because it's part of our way of seeing the world. That it's very much a Western individualism type influence.
Yes. And you know, Eileen, you made this point to me, and I think you spot on when you critique the book, and I think you're right. I've attributed this bias towards individualistic or individualism versus system orientation. I've always attributed that to the heavy influence of the human sciences and the medical model in the training of coaches. Lots of psychology, which is based in individual therapy. And I think that's true to a point, but I think you raise something which I think is absolutely right, and that is that it's a fundamental difference between individualism versus collectivism. It's a cultural kind of Hofstadter, cultural difference orientation. It's an underlying cultural assumption. And business is inherently collectivistic, if there is such a term, in its orientation, because even the word company is in the company of. It's the idea that people working together have greater leverage than people working on their own. And the word organization is a human relational field that seeks to sort of synergize its outputs. And I think that's part of that tension. The second differentiator is one of purpose. Think about it like this: purpose. What is the purpose of life coaching counseling versus what is the purpose of business coaching? And they are not aligned. And if you begin with the way that coaches are trained, they're trained in this individualistic, as we've already mentioned, but kind of healthcare, wellness, well-being, pursuit of personal growth and awareness orientation as the purpose. And in business, that is not always the purpose. I like to say in business, it's about value creation. Companies are not in play in the business world to build awareness, truth, meaning, well-being in the world. They're there to create value. And unfortunately, coaches are trained in the sort of human science model, which puts truth, meaning, purpose, well-being as the end goal, and then enter into the business world using the coaching technology, if you want to call it that, to pursue those outcomes without linking them to deliverables, to value creation in the person's role in the workplace.
Whatever they might be.
Whatever they might be. And unfortunately, the ROI narrative that I often hear in coaches who try and sell using this, what I would consider a misunderstanding of purpose of business coaching, is it goes something like this. It says, look, I'll work with your people as a coach. They're speaking to a manager, and we'll pursue increased insight, emotional intelligence, awareness, ability to sort of understand who they are and where they come from and how they think. And that will be the stuff of our coaching engagements. And the ROI for you, Mr. or Ms. Manager, is going to be that more aware, psychologically sophisticated, and sort of well employees will perform better, and you'll get value creation. Isn't this so? And most people, even in business, go, yeah, that sounds pretty logical. Great, where do I sign? Knock yourself out, let's see how you go. The truth is that that's unfortunately not always true. It's not always true that increasing your psychological capabilities will automatically mean that you increase the value that you deliver in your role in the workplace. And, you don't have to believe me about this. Just ask yourself the following questions. Think about people who are super, super good at their jobs. Well, let's use the word job. Steve Jobs. Think about him. Was he super successful? Think about other people who've been really, really good in business. Are they psychologically very sophisticated and lots of well-being and lots of insight and emotional intelligence always? I think we find that in
Can't
very
talk about Steve Jobs in the same breath as
well,
that.
exactly. We often will they can be, but often we will find super successful people in business who are distinctly psychologically dysfunctional. So we know that in the equation, certainly in that direction, it's not always true. You can be very successful in business and be really, really messed up psychologically. And there's a long list of people nodding their heads going, I can think of a whole lot of people like that. And then let's flip it the other way. What about people who are like really, really evolved souls? Wise, evolved, reflective, aware souls in the business world. Do they always do well? And I think we know that you can be an awesome human being and be performing badly. In fact, just today, in my work, I was busy with someone and I was saying to them, you're an incredible human being, but where's the delivery? Maybe you're meditating too often and you should be working. You know what I mean? I mean that tongue in cheek, but in another way it's not. Where is your focus? Is your focus to deliver on the deliverables, or is your focus to evolve as a human being? And, energy is energy. Where are you putting your energy? And, when I think about this person, their focus is off. Their focus is on themselves in a certain way, which is great for the planet. It's not always good for the outcomes and the performance outcomes that are required. So it is sometimes true, but not always true, that building psychological capability means the person takes up their role better and delivers better. It is only sometimes true. It is certainly not enough to say, I'll work on psychological attributes and awareness and automatically you'll get value creation. It's not enough. It's unacceptable. I think that it's a dangerous narrative, one that's widely used. And my book says, Coaching on the Axis. What is that axis? The axis is the axis that says, on the first point, the axis between the individual and the organization, individual to system. And on the second point, the axis between the individual's internal world and psychological attributes and capabilities and sensibility, and the axis between that and the performance deliverables in their role. And you've got to make that link, and it's got to be real and proper. It can't just be arbitrarily made.
And as you've put it, how they take up that role.
And how they take up the role. So, for example, the person says, well, I've done 6 months of coaching and I'm really more emotionally intelligent, and the manager goes, that's fantastic, but how has that increased value creation in the work? And the person goes, Well, then why should shareholders pay for that? That must come out of that person's pocket because it's their own personal growth, but the other client, remember there's the other client being the organization, has had no value. It's like going for marital counseling, let's go back to that, and after 6 months of marital counseling, the wife or the husband, just one or the other, goes, this has been amazing for me and I'm feeling a lot, better about myself as a human being, and the husband or wife on the other side goes, well, our relationship's unchanged. I'm still feeling how I felt 6 months ago. To me, that's naught outcome for marital counseling.
Well, it can actually be completely negative.
Or
I have
even
many times seen it counterproductive.
Yeah.
And don't you also see it in the business world where people find their purpose and leave?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's this research that's come out that says that a lot of people who experience coaching, that receive coaching in the corporate world, a high percentage of them leave their jobs. And sometimes I wonder if that is because we like to think that's because they find their true capability and purpose and they look for a job that's more aligned. I think a good percentage of those are people who've been so enrolled in the pursuits of their own personal development at the blind expense in terms of opportunity cost of time and money in value creation in the company that they sort of lost their way and they think, well, I want to pursue something, about growing as a person. And half of them want to become coaches.
Unfortunately, I think that's true.
Yeah. So, is it a good thing, a bad thing? I don't know, but it's definitely not value creating for the company. And why should the company pay?
Exactly. There's no reason why the company should pay when actually what they're doing, the coaches are coaching people out of organizations.
Exactly. So the second point you summarize is one where it says, the purpose is the pursuit of, in life coaching and counseling, is the pursuit of growth, personal growth of the person. But in business, the pursuit must be performance-based. It must be value-creating. There must be a deliverable. And as long as those are linked, it's fine. I mean, you can, if you determine that for this person to take up their role and deliver value, they need to work on an aspect of their emotional intelligence, that's fine. Then pursue that in business coaching, because you can see that if they improve that, this aspect of their delivery in their role will be improved. But one can't just automatically say, let's just go around, spraying this great dialogue technique on people in the organization to make them grow, and this will automatically mean better business. No way.
No way.
And then the third and final one is more subtle. I would consider that to be the last one is about culture. And it's the culture of business versus the culture of what I would call life coaching counseling. And there's often a disconnect at that level. So if you look, we've established that the raison d'etre, if you like, of the business world is value creation, which can be anything from profit, but it could also be putting in a good system if you're in IT, or brokering an internal transfer price between two business units or something like that. So it's being valuable to the company in terms of its outcomes. That's the raison d'etre. What is the raison d'etre in psychology, healthcare, wellness, which is really the influencing theory in teaching coaching these days? The raison d'etre there is truth, meaning, purpose, the pursuit of consciousness,
Well-being,
or just general well-being, inner peace, harmony, and all these beautiful things. I mean, I certainly do not object to people pursuing these things. On the contrary, I think they're necessary to pursue them. But there's a disconnect there, because you have coaches that are enrolled in the training to become a coach, and inside themselves, what they really believe they're doing deep down is that they are bringing about an evolution of consciousness in people. They're, greater consciousness, awareness, and well-being. And they are not aligned, ethically aligned, to the contract with the business, where the business says, look, we're bringing you in here because we're expecting an uptick in outcomes, business outcomes. And we are not about the pursuit of all this, the pursuit of increased consciousness and awareness. We're about the pursuit of business objectives set by the business. And it's can be like two ships passing in the night. And most coaches are not conscious of this disconnect, unfortunately. They will often say to someone in business, yes, I'm totally on board with the commercial reality of this business, and I'm a business coach and so forth. But in a sort of semi-secret way, they are kind of like missionaries of consciousness,
Yes. I've come across some coaches who are disapproving of business per se as being the pursuit of
Right.
a capitalist enterprise.
Exactly.
Now, you cannot, ethically work in a business if you disapprove of the fundamental proposition of why the business exists.
Exactly. Now, that's, on this continuum of disconnect, you get these extreme cases where you have coaches that are, fundamentally, ideologically opposed to capitalism, for example, or they have judgments about corporate life and so forth, power and all those dark things that we know there's darkness there. It's not as if we don't know it's there, but they've got judgments about it. They haven't processed it, and then they're a kind of wolf in sheep's clothing, because they come in as a friend to the business, but secretly, quite unconsciously, in extreme cases, are secretly enrolling people in a kind of pursuit of consciousness rather than capitalist interests. And I'm not judging that as right or wrong. I'm not saying the one pursuit is wrong and the other pursuit is right. What I'm saying is, if you're going to offer a contract in which you undertake to provide a service to a company, there's an ethical contract there that the spirit with which you engage at a cultural level, at an assumption level, is positive towards that entity.
Well, if you go back to your marital example, that every party in that room, that both spouses and the therapist are actually in service of the relationship.
Correct. It would
There
be
isn't
like,
one who's not.
excellent. That's an excellent analogy, because it would be like a couple whose marriage is on the rocks going to a marital counselor, and secretly the marital counselor does not believe in the institution of marriage, but doesn't say so and works with them. That's an ethical problem, and I'm saying that exists. That's the third factor, is the cultural disconnect between the underlying assumptions of healthcare and wellness, from which a lot of theory is used to train coaches, and the underlying cultural assumptions in the business world, which are unashamedly in the interests of profit and growth in business. And those coaches that haven't done that work are often out of integrity with the contract they make with the company. And that's why we go back to your earlier point, where you often find people who then have been enrolled in a coaching process. During the course of that process, they become disconnected from the business, and they want to kind of pursue other things, and you wonder where's that coming from. And I think that's a problem.